Chapter 1. The Mystery of the Unopened Cigarette Case. I shall never forget the day that brought us to the venerable wood-panelled drawing-room of Sir Reginald Thorn's Mayfair townhouse, where the unlikeliest of enigmas would be set before my little grey cells. It was a crisp April afternoon, the kind when London spring feels poised between promise and lingering chill. I insisted upon duty's primacy over companionable leisure, and so it was Hastings who accompanied me to the scene. We were summoned by Lady Beatrice Thorn, Sir Reginald's only daughter, whose elegant telegram had been delivered to my flat at 16 Curzon Street. The message spoke of a most disturbing discovery and begged my immediate presence. Lady Beatrice's handwriting, usually as precise as a cello's bow, was tremulous, an uncharacteristic note that hinted at both fear and urgency. I require no more than the tremor of a hand to discern that all is not as it seems. Upon arrival, I was met by the butler, a tall, hawk-nosed fellow named Merton, whose bow bespoke impeccable training, but whose eyes darted with the anxiety of one awaiting a verdict. He guided us through corridors hung with ancestral portraits, their stern visages dimly lit by salt-glass lanterns. Each gaze seemed to weigh my Belgian person, no doubt questioning what little Nan would dare unravel secrets woven into Thorn family silk. At last, we entered the drawing-room, a spacious chamber furnished in sober mahogany and burnished brass. Plush chairs curved invitingly around a low table strewn with open books, a porcelain vase of hyacinths, and a single unopened silver cigarette case. That object alone commanded attention. Its lid bore the Thorn family crest, a stag rampant beneath a crescent moon. Yet something was amiss. The case lay beneath a perfectly placed glass dome, an artifact on display as though it were as priceless as a Fabergé egg rather than a utilitarian treasure meant to be handled. Lady Beatrice stood by the fireplace, a slender figure draped in lavender silk, eyes rimmed pink with sleepless nights. Behind her the hearth was cold, ashes long since cleared, yet above it loomed a grand clock, its minute hand frozen at 2:17. The stillness of that moment, the frozen hand, and the untouched cigarette case all whispered of secrets waiting to be unearthed, and of a mystery more profound than any mere burglary or accident. Chapter 2. The First Clues. Poirot stood beside the silver cigarette case, his little grey cells already whirring through the permutations of possibility. Hastings watched from the threshold, notebook in hand, eager to record each nuance of the investigation. Between them lay the polished mahogany table, its surface reflecting the pale light filtering through lace-curtained windows. Dust motes drifted in the shafts of sun, as though time itself hesitated in this room of suspended secrets. "Observe, Hastings," Poirot murmured, his gloved fingertips poised just above the glass dome. The dome is pristine, no fingerprint, no smudge, yet the case beneath shows signs of gentle handling. Note the faint abrasion along the lid's edge, here. He traced a tiny pale line. Someone lifted the case, considered opening it, then replaced it with great care. Hastings peered closely. But why seal it again under glass? To prevent tampering? Perhaps, Poirot conceded, or to stage a tableau. A crime scene is often made for the eyes of others, as much as for the act itself. He straightened and surveyed the room anew. Let us inspect more broadly. They moved toward the hearth. The grand clock, frozen at 2:17, drew Hastings's attention. "The butler said that's when the household staff heard Lady Beatrice's scream," Hastings noted. "It matches." "Yet clocks seldom break at the moment of a shout," Poirot replied. "Either someone stopped it deliberately, or it is a mechanical fault we must confirm." He tapped the clock's face. No tick responded. A missing pendulum weight, perhaps. I shall inquire. Poirot's gaze shifted to the hyacinth vase. One blossom drooped unnaturally, its petals crushed on the tabletop. A smudge of dark liquid. Coffee, tea, or something stronger. He signaled to Hastings. Examine the petals. The staining may reveal the drink's nature. Lady Beatrice hovered nearby, anxiety etched into her refined features. She offered a trembling curtsy. I apologize, Monsieur Poirot. I feared something dreadful, and I rushed in. My lady, fear often clouds our memory. Poirot soothed. We require clarity, not further distress. Would you recall precisely what you saw before you screamed? Lady Beatrice inhaled deeply. I entered the room to bring Sir Reginald his afternoon blend, Earl Grey with a hint of jasmine, as he prefers. I found him here, slumped in that armchair. She indicated a high-backed leather seat by the window, and the cigarette case beneath the dome. I called for Merton, and then nothing made sense. Poirot nodded, his moustaches quivering with thought. And Sir Reginald? Is he alive? She shivered. He is unconscious, but breathing. The doctor attends him. She lifted her skirts and moved to the intruding sunbeam, as though seeking warmth. Merton insisted we seal everything. The dome was already in place when I returned. Curious, Poirot mused. Let us examine the armchair. He approached, eyes narrowing on the upholstery. A faint smear of dark residue clung to one armrest. He dabbed a handkerchief to test it. That, Hastings, is not tea, possibly ink, or a very dark wine. Hastings frowned. Ink? From a pen? Or from a spilled carafe of port? Poirot allowed. But aren't we told Sir Reginald only drinks port on special occasions, and this was but a Wednesday? He bent to inspect the carpet beneath the chair. A small fragment of paper, nearly invisible, caught his eye. He picked it up with gloved care, half a torn page from a letter, the end of a sentence. To confront you at once, do not underestimate. The final words were missing. A letter indeed, Poirot said, tucking the fragment into a glassine envelope Hastings produced. Someone tore this deliberately. What message did Sir Reginald receive, and who sent it? He looked toward Lady Beatrice. My lady, do you know of any correspondence arriving today? She shook her head. None unusual. Father received letters daily, business inquiries, family notes, but nothing alarming. Then our first clue, Poirot pronounced, is that someone preferred secrecy. They destroyed evidence and then arranged the scene under glass to suggest nothing had been touched. Yet their haste left that abrasion, that liquid smear, and this torn letter. He moved next to the window. The drapes were drawn partially aside, though April's chill suggested they should be fully closed. A sudden draught coolly brushed Hastings' cheek. Open window, Poirot? Hastings ventured. A fine point, Poirot agreed. Indeed, one latch on the casement was loose. An entrance or exit? Possibly for a faint of heart who desired to appear as innocent intermediate. Note the fresh mud on the sill. He dropped to his knees and found a clod of damp earth. Garden soil, likely from the west terrace. We must question the gardener. Hastings pocketed the fragment and the soil sample. We already summoned Merton and Lady Beatrice's maid, Miss Pryor. What of other staff? Exactly, Poirot said. We must establish timeline and alibis. He nodded toward the set of servants now assembling at the door, beginning with each person present between 2 and 3 this afternoon. But first, Hastings, observe this. He pointed to a faint smell under the hyacinth petals. Hastings inhaled gently. Jasmine. But your lady brought tea with jasmine to Sir Reginald. Why should the room also smell faintly of jasmine before the cup was poured? Could be the same tea spilled in haste, Hastings suggested. Perhaps, said Poirot, or perhaps someone used fragrant sachets to mask another odor. One never knows what subtle fragrances can conceal. Miss Pryor, pale as chalk but composed, stepped forward. Poirot greeted her with a nod. "Tell me, my dear, did you witness Lady Beatrice's entrance?" "Only from the threshold, monsieur. I heard her cry out, then Merton's footsteps. The room was already in disarray when I peered in." "In disarray?" Poirot arched an eyebrow. "Disarray is a relative term here. Please describe what you saw." The maid swallowed. The books were scattered, open to passages on family wills and inheritance laws. One cushion was askew, and the chair where Sir Reginald sat, it was tilted back on two legs, as if he'd recoiled suddenly. Poirot stored this. "And the cigarette case, was it already under the dome?" "I believe so. It gleamed beneath the glass." "Excellent. Even chaos can be staged. The culprit wished us to believe the room fell into disorder by accident." Poirot turned to Hastings. "We shall need to examine those books for notes, smudges, or any inscriptions added today." Hastings nodded, scribbling quickly in his book. Beyond them, Lady Beatrice sank into a velvet-upholstered settee, pressing a trembling hand to her heart. Poirot approached and offered a steadying smile. "My lady, I beg your patience." The little grey cells required time to sort truth from illusion. "Will you recount again the events of this afternoon, from the moment you left your father's study?" As she began, her words trembled, but her eyes held resolution. Hastings took his place beside Poirot, ready to catch every nuance. Outside, the wind stirred the garden's budding blossoms, and within, the stage was set for deeper inquiry. Each fragment of ink, each smear of liquid, every displaced volume would guide Poirot closer to the heart of deception. And from these first clues, the path to the culprit would slowly, inexorably reveal itself, so long as none misstep further in the tangled game of shadows and subterfuge. Chapter 3. The Gathering of Suspects. The late afternoon sun had dipped low behind Mayfair's rooftops by the time Inspector Horbury arrived, his official bearing at odds with the subdued hush of Sir Reginald Thorn's drawing-room. Poirot, standing erect beside the frozen clock, surveyed the assembled circle with a measured calm. Around him were assembled those who had dwelt in the house during the hour of crisis, each bearing a potential key to the mystery of the unopened cigarette case and Sir Reginald's unexplained collapse. First, there was Lady Beatrice Thorn herself, pale yet resolved, standing near the window with the stiffness of one who must conceal more than sorrow. The Thorn heiress, barely 27, had grown up in gilded privilege, her education marked by Parisian salons and Oxford lectures, but beneath her refined manners simmered a fierce devotion to her father. She had recently quarrelled with him over his insistence that she marry Colonel Carrington, an arrangement she resisted. Her motive, some might say, lay in the painful tension between duty and desire. Next to her stood Colonel Edmund Carrington, tall, square-shouldered, exuding military confidence. His grey-blue eyes met Poirot's without flinch, but over his finely tailored uniform there hovered a tension no medals could conceal. Carrington had served with distinction in India and had been invited to Sir Reginald's house to discuss family investments in the Raj. Ventures rumoured to have soured. He admitted heated words that afternoon. Sir Reginald's rebuke had included the threat to withdraw the Colonel's allowance. A wounded pride, perhaps, or a desperate fear of financial ruin, enough to drive a man to extremes. By the hearth stood Mr. Philip Elliston, The family solicitor, his slender frame bent as if under the weight of invisible ledgers. His gloved hands toyed with a leather-bound portfolio, and his expression was one of polite detachment. Elliston had drafted Sir Reginald's will just 2 weeks before, advising against Beatrice's marriage until the family's finances rebounded. Rumour held that the solicitor himself stood to gain from certain clauses an inheritance of fees, if not more. In his clipped tones, Poirot detected a fear of exposure, as though the torn letter's missing passage might implicate him. To Poirot's left, the butler, Merton, maintained the posture of a man unaccustomed to scrutiny. His narrow shoulders and hawk-like nose lent him the appearance of someone perpetually on guard. Merton had served the Thorns for over a decade, his loyalty unquestioned, yet whispers suggested a nighttime tryst with Miss Pryor, the housemaid. Loyalty and passion, Poirot knew, made strange companions. If Merton had coveted Lady Beatrice, or feared the loss of his place in the household, his motive was as human as any. Miss Eleanor Pryor, her apron still faintly scented with freshly laundered linen, had remained unusually silent since her initial testimony. She now stood by the French doors that led to the west terrace, gaze fixed on something beyond. The Thorns' maid of 7 years, she possessed a keen eye for detail, so keen, in fact, that she discovered the crushed hyacinth first. Yet her reluctance to share all she knew hinted at a secret, a letter found, perhaps, or an overheard whisper in the hall. Whatever her reasons, her silence was as revealing as the confession of words. Lastly, a stranger to most stood near the door. Mr. Cedric Fielding, the head gardener, his coat still flecked with earth. His calloused hands bore the marks of honest labor, yet the lines on his face spoke of disappointment, of a mistreated agreement to lease adjacent land, which Sir Reginald had reneged upon only days ago. Fielding's resentment was an open wound in the garden's heart, tended only by weeds and bruised ego. If the master's downfall restored some justice in his mind, justice had a habit of demanding a steep price. Inspector Horbury cleared his throat. "We've heard the household staff. Now, Monsieur Poirot, the law requires we hear from the principal parties in residence." He glanced at Poirot, who inclined his head in acknowledgement. Poirot turned first to Lady Beatrice. "My lady, you mentioned letters, but none reached you today." She shook her head. "Nothing unusual, only the solicitor's messenger at noon. I was in the conservatory arranging tulips when he arrived. He left within 5 minutes, portfolio in hand." "Was the portfolio the same Mr. Elliston now carries?" Poirot inquired. Her eyes flickered. "Yes, I believe so." Poirot made a mental note. Then he addressed Colonel Carrington, stepping forward so that the sunlight illuminated his moustaches like a halo of careful precision. "Colonel, you and Sir Reginald argued in this very room, did you not?" Carrington's jaw tightened. "We disagreed, yes, but I left when father became too agitated. I needed fresh air and walked to the terrace. I returned only when I heard Lady Beatrice's scream." "Did you pass through the drawing-room then?" He hesitated. "Yes, but the dome was already in place. I thought it a curious new curiosity father had commissioned." He offered a tight smile. Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Curiosities often hold truths, Colonel, though not always the ones we seek." He then approached Mr. Elliston, who straightened, clutching his portfolio. "Mr. Elliston, you drafted the will. Did you perceive any reason to warn Sir Reginald of imminent danger?" The solicitor drew back, as though the query itself might wound him. "Murder is not within the purview of a solicitor, Monsieur Poirot. My concern was the family's interests." Yet letters, as we have seen, can carry both warning and threat. Poirot paused, inviting reflection. What of that fragment we found by the chair? To confront you at once. Do not underestimate. Did you write those words? Elliston's face paled. I cannot recall. Poirot stepped away. Memory may deceive, Mr. Elliston, but parchment rarely lies. The butler and maid were next. Poirot addressed Merton with gentle firmness. You oversaw the sealing of the case beneath the dome. Why? Merton swallowed. My lady insisted. She feared evidence might be disturbed. And you obeyed without question? My duty is to the family. Poirot nodded. Duty, like love, can bind tightly. To Miss Pryor, he said, we saw the books open to the will's chapter. Did Sir Reginald read them today? She bit her lip. He consulted that volume just before I brought tea. He muttered something about inheritance complications. What complications? Poirot pressed. Her shoulders trembled. He spoke of disinheriting, of removing someone from the will. I do not know whom. Finally, Poirot turned to Mr. Fielding, who shifted from one boot to the other. Mr. Fielding, that soil found on the sill, yours? Fielding winced. I walked the terrace at 2 o'clock. A stray clod may have stuck to my shoe, but I went directly to the potting shed after your scream. Yet you cleared the garden alone? Poirot persisted. No one saw you? The gardener shrugged. I asked young Pritchard to water the roses and went inside when I heard the alarm. Poirot allowed a faint smile. Very well. Young Pritchard may prove an interesting witness. As the inspector made notes, Poirot surveyed the group. 6 people, 6 motives. Love withheld, pride wounded, ambition unmasked, loyalty tested, loyalty betrayed, and financial resentment. Each suspect wore their facade with trembling confidence. The drawing-room's stillness deepened, as though waiting for the next move. Poirot tapped his cane gently. We are but at the prologue of our inquiry. The clues we have gathered, abrasion, liquid smear, frozen clock, torn letter, each points to intention, not accident. Tomorrow we shall speak again, but tonight, consider this. Often the culprit believes they have manipulated every witness, except one. He let the words linger, then closed his eyes briefly, as if summoning his next thought. Hastings, notebook full, exchanged a glance with Inspector Horbury. Outside, the garden's shadows lengthened, and the terrace wind brought a faint echo of birdsong. Yet within the house, suspicion reigned. Each suspect would retire this night with their conscience heavy, unknowing who had observed them, and which powders, perfumes, and pages might yet betray the truth. Thus concluded the gathering of suspects, a tableau of ambition and fear, each soul poised on the knife's edge between innocence and guilt. And in the silence, Poirot's little grey cells began weaving threads of connection that would, in time, reveal the hidden hand behind the unopened cigarette case. Chapter 4. Poirot discredits the official theory. The following morning, a hush lay over the drawing-room as if the house itself were holding its breath. Inspector Horbury stood before the assembled servant staff and key household members, ready to deliver the official account of events. He cleared his throat and began in measured tones. Sir Reginald Thorn had been discovered collapsed in his armchair at approximately 2:17 p.m., the result, he asserted, of accidental poisoning by contaminated tea. The inspector's voice carried authority, yet his facts lacked the precision demanded by so finely wrought a mystery. Poirot remained seated by the fireplace, his posture unassuming, but his moustaches bristling with anticipation. Hastings stood beside him, notebook at the ready. As Horbury concluded with the admonition that no foul play was suspected, a ripple of relief passed through the group, but Poirot's tiny hand shot up imperiously. "Pardon, Inspector," Poirot interjected, voice soft but firm. "Accidental poisoning? Pray tell us how the poison entered the tea, and why the cup remained untouched in Sir Reginald's hand." Inspector Horbury hesitated, casting a glance toward Lady Beatrice, whose cheeks had flushed at the mention of tea. "The cup stood by his side, Monsieur Poirot, and the tea was found to contain a minute quantity of aconite." He allowed a distant note of triumph, probably ingested inadvertently when he raised the cup to his lips. Poirot's grey eyes gleamed. Ah, but the cup was cold. Sir Reginald had not sipped since his collapse. He rose and crossed to the low table, lifting the porcelain vessel with inevitability. Observe. With the gentlest tilt, he demonstrated the absence of any residual warmth. Moreover, the fragrance of jasmine is present, yet the taste would betray the bitter sting of aconite even in a diluted brew. Sir Reginald, were he able to speak, would have spat it out immediately. The assembled witnesses exchanged uneasy murmurs. Inspector Horbury's brow furrowed. "And you, Monsieur Poirot, suggest something else?" "Indeed." Poirot placed the cup back and turned to the frozen clock above the mantel. The clock stopped at 2:17, but its mechanism is such that it winds only once every 24 hours. If it ceased, it was for want of winding or by design. He tapped the dial. "Yet I find the key in the winding box, turned precisely half a revolution." Someone paused the clock to mark a moment, and yet failed to reset it. Hastings added softly, "The staff heard no ticking before Lady Beatrice's arrival." He recorded the correction in his book. Poirot nodded approvingly. The inspector's confidence wavered. Poirot seized the moment to expose the flaws in the official narrative, stepping slowly through each detail. The dome conceals fingerprint smudges. The abrasion on the cigarette case proves it was handled. The clod of earth betrays an outdoor exit. The torn letter suggests threat or warning. And the liquid on the armchair is not tea at all, but ink, specifically from Elliston's solicitor's pen. Would you truly believe Sir Reginald Thorn imbibed ink willingly? A collective gasp rose. Mr. Elliston shifted but met Poirot's gaze. Poirot continued, "No, we see here a staged accident. Our culprit intended to frame a collapse by poison, yet used the semblance of tea only to disguise the removal of a letter and the substitution of Sir Reginald's cup. When the victim showed signs of distress, they fancied a delayed death, padding time to sow doubt. Yet, as is often the case, theatricality betrays truth." Inspector Horbury swallowed his pride. "Monsieur Poirot, what then is your explanation of the events at 2:17 p.m.? "With your permission," Poirot said, "I will demonstrate." He beckoned Merton to place the armchair back against the table. Then, revealing a hidden sample of ink Hastings had collected, Poirot brushed a drop near the rim of the cup. The dark liquid beaded in the same pattern as on the armrest. "Now, this ink matches exactly the smear we found." Sir Reginald, reaching for his letter, fragmented though it is, brushed against his cup, spilling only a few drops. In distress, he rose, but true poison was never present. What felled him was shock upon finding the note's content, and perhaps a blow delivered swiftly after his astonishment. Hastings chimed in. "The letter spoke of disinheritance, someone on whom Sir Reginald had intended to inflict financial ruin. His reaction was visceral." "And note the crushed hyacinth," Poirot added, plucking the petal from the table. That blossom fell when Sir Reginald gasped and recoiled, not when he sipped. The scene is recreated with tragic overstatement, but the culprit misjudged the strength of our victim's constitution. Lady Beatrice's hands fluttered to her throat. Then you believe this was an attempt on his life, not an accident? A calculated attempt, Poirot confirmed, but one poorly executed. He paused, letting his words settle like sediment. Therefore, Inspector, I submit that we treat this case as a murder attempt, not a mere accident. Our suspect remains among those present, and their morning alibi must be re-examined. Inspector Horbury nodded, chastened but grateful. We will withdraw the accidental verdict. He turned to the staff. Remain in the house. No one is to leave until further notice. As the room emptied, Poirot addressed Hastings in a subdued voice. You see, mon ami, the official theory is but a house of cards, frail and easily toppled by logic. Now that the false narrative is undone, we may focus on our true quarry. Hastings closed his notebook. Remarkable, Poirot. You've turned the tables completely. But who benefits most from this staging? Poirot folded his arms, eyes drifting to each receding figure. The answer lies in the fragments we've gathered, the torn letter, the pacing of footsteps on the terrace, the absent pendulum weight, and the faint perfume of jasmine meant to mask the acrid tang of ink. We must follow each thread, no matter how slender, until the culprit's artifice unravels. Outside, the east terrace glowed with early morning dew, but within the drawing-room, shadows of suspicion lengthened. The players had been admonished to stay. The stage was set for deeper inquiry. And as Poirot's little grey cells prepared for their next challenge, the great detective allowed himself a flicker of satisfaction. The door to the official explanation had just closed. Behind it lay the hidden corridor leading directly to the truth. Chapter 5. Initial Interviews. Begin by mid-morning, the drawing-room had been transformed into a makeshift interval chamber. The polished mahogany table now supported an array of chairs arranged in a semicircle, and Inspector Horbury stood ready to record each statement. Poirot sat at the head, his posture regal yet unassuming, little grey cells alert to every inflection, every hesitation. Hastings took station beside him, pen poised, eager to catch each nuance. Poirot beckoned Lady Beatrice forward first. She swept to the centre, her lavender silk gown whispering against the carpet. "My lady," Poirot began in his gentle French accent, "you claimed to find your father upon entering with tea. But tell me, did you pause upon seeing the dome already in place? Or did your entrance disturb someone still at work?" Lady Beatrice's eyes flickered. I went straight to him. Merton was adjusting the dome as I entered. He ducked behind the table when I screamed. She clasped her hands. I thought him terrified, not guilty. And Merton's retreat. Did you notice any ink upon his fingers, or soil on his shoes? Poirot pressed. She blinked. No, monsieur, but I was hysterical. Her voice cracked. I did not observe details beyond my father's state. Poirot nodded. Emotion can obscure truth. Pray, recall your route from the conservatory. You passed by the west terrace? Beatrice faltered. Yes, but the French doors were ajar. A breeze fluttered my skirts. Precisely, Poirot murmured. An open route for an interloper. He allowed her a moment before dismissing her with a courteous bow. Next came Colonel Carrington. His military bearing stiffened as he entered. Colonel, you left the room to gain fresh air. Did you encounter anyone on the terrace between 2:10 and 2:17? Carrington's jaw clenched. None. I strolled alone, considering father's reproach. festering father's reproach. He cleared his throat. I may have crossed paths with the gardener, but he was bent over the rose beds far from the doors. Indeed, Poirot arched an eyebrow. Yet the soil on the sill matches that of your well-creased boots. He glanced down. Have you recently polished them? There is no residual dust mingled with the mud. The colonel's composure wavered. He lifted one boot and inspected the sole. I admit it, I wiped them upon the stone balustrade. He glared, but I saw nothing untoward. Then you saw no one seeking to replace or remove an object inside? Poirot tapped the dome. No furtive hand? Carrington hesitated, eyes cast down. But my mind was occupied. Poirot allowed him a curt nod and turned to Mr. Elliston. The solicitor approached, gloved portfolio clutched to his chest. Mr. Elliston, you drafted the will. Did Sir Reginald confide in you any intention to alter it today? Elliston closed his eyes, as though to summon the moment. He spoke of revising certain clauses, specifically to restrict Beatrice's control over foreign investments until marriage. He inhaled. He did not threaten to disinherit, merely to delay. And yet this fragment suggests otherwise. Poirot revealed the torn letter. Do these words, "do not underestimate," ring familiar? Elliston paled. I may have written a warning to him about underestimating the risks of investing in colonial enterprises, about those who would exploit his fortunes. His voice trembled. If I tore it, it was to prevent worry. Poirot tilted his head. But the ink on the armchair matched this portfolio's fountain pen. You spilled the note's warning and then attempted to conceal its existence. I intended no harm, Elliston protested, only to spare the family anxiety. Anxiety can be a dangerous motive. Poirot tapped the letter gently. You hid this, believing it benign, yet your hand betrayed panic, not reason. Elliston bowed his head. I will cooperate fully. Merton and Miss Pryor were interviewed together next, their shared glance betraying a private bond. Poirot observed them silently before speaking. You two, please recount your movements between 2 and 3 o'clock. Merton spoke first. I ensured all items remained untouched. When Lady Beatrice screamed, I placed the dome, then fetched Miss Pryor to assist. Miss Pryor's face remained impassive. I found the hyacinth crushed and books disturbed. I fetched cleaning cloths. Poirot steepled his fingers. Yet you did not clean the spill on the armrest. He nodded to Hastings, who produced the cloth with ink stains. Curious omission. He looked at Pryor. Was I mistaken in thinking you detected the jasmine's faint perfume? She hesitated. I thought it was the tea scent, monsieur. And you, Merton, did not notice the cup's chill. He shook his head vigorously. My focus was on preserving the scene. Poirot allowed a thin smile. Loyalty can blind us to disloyalty in others. We will return to your testimonies in due course. Finally, Mr. Fielding stepped forward. His rugged hands idly rolled a gardening hat. Mr. Fielding, you resent your broken lease. Did you plan to confront Sir Reginald today? Fielding's eyes darkened. I went to speak with him about compensation. I did not intend violence. Yet you alone had motive to muddy the path, forcing others to tread suspects' tracks. Poirot gestured to the soil-laden clod. This misdirection could easily chafe the investigations. Fielding's gaze dropped. I regret that walk now. Poirot closed his notebook. Thank you. Each of you has spoken truth as you perceived it. Yet perception, like memory, can be shaped by desire. Tomorrow we shall explore your alibis more closely, and the little grey cells will continue to sift reality from illusion. As the interviews concluded, Poirot invited Hastings for a private word. In the hallway's dim light, the detective confided, "Each witness reveals both fact and facade. We must uncover what lies beneath, the hidden motive that compelled one among them to stage chaos rather than confession." Hastings nodded, admiration in his eyes. "Who do you suspect most, Poirot?" The detective's moustaches twitched. "Patience, my friend. The game is now afoot, and the true culprit has yet to feel the weight of our scrutiny." With that, he returned to the drawing-room, ready to continue the delicate dance of deduction. Chapter 6. The First False Lead. By the late afternoon, the buzz of urgent whispers had grown into an almost tangible tension within Sir Reginald's drawing-room. Inspector Horbury, emboldened by the evidence of ink smears and Elliston's torn letter, declared in a curt tone that Mr. Philip Elliston was the prime suspect in the attempted murder. The solicitor was escorted, hands raised in protest, toward the grand entrance hall by two officers in gleaming helmets. A hush fell as the heavy oak doors closed behind him, leaving the remaining household members to absorb the shock of his abrupt removal. Poirot watched the scene with a serene facade, though beneath his composed exterior, his little grey cells were in full furrow. He turned to Hastings, voice low and measured. "You see, Hastings, the evidence we offered, ink matching the portfolio, the torn fragment of that warning letter, has led the authorities to believe Mr. Elliston acted alone and without assistance. Yet something still escapes notice." Hastings, pencil poised over his notebook, nodded. "They found ink on his gloves, and a fragment of the letter in his desk drawer. It does seem damning, Poirot." He traced the arc of a smudge on the table with his finger. "But I sense your reservation." Poirot's moustaches quivered. "Just so. The official theory is tidy, too tidy. The criminal mastermind seldom allows such straightforward conviction, for it hinges on one person's act. Real cunning involves layers, Hastings. An accomplice, a red herring, or an overlooked motive." Lady Beatrice, still draped in her lavender silk, approached. Her eyes glistened with anxiety. "Monsieur Poirot, now that Mr. Elliston is held, can we rest assured my father will recover safely?" "Our immediate duty is to your father's health," Poirot replied gently. "But rest must wait until the truth is fully revealed. I beg you, my lady, to summon any further recollections. Did Mr. Elliston ever handle the domes, glass, or did you see him near the clock before—" He paused, searching her face. "Before Sir Reginald collapsed." She frowned, brow knitting. "He was at the desk when I brought the tea. Later, I saw him near the fireplace, consulting those books on the inheritance clause. But I did not see him wind the clock." "Very good." Poirot bowed his head briefly. "And you, Colonel Carrington?" He turned to the military man, who leaned against— "And you, Colonel Carrington?" He turned to the military man, who leaned against a bookshelf with arms folded. "The inspector's query did not include you, for the evidence pointed elsewhere. Yet your name arose in the torn letter's margin, in one of Sir Reginald's annotations. You see, Hastings, Sir Reginald had scribbled E.C. beside the phrase, 'Do not underestimate,' on the letter before tearing it. That evidence was overlooked in the rush to arrest." Hastings' eyes widened. "Do you believe Colonel Carrington edited the letter?" "Possibly, or at the very least it implicates him in the intended confrontation. Note also that the pendulum weight we retrieved from the clock mechanism bore a subtle engraving, the initials E.C." Poirot paused, letting the implication settle. Yet Carrington's boasts of loyalty to Sir Reginald would never allow him to sabotage his friend so openly. One must wonder if someone framed both Elliston and Carrington to distract us from a third party entirely. Inspector Horbury cleared his throat. Monsieur Poirot, if you believe the arrest of Mr. Elliston is erroneous, do you propose we release him immediately? By all means, Poirot replied, but I recommend we secure further evidence beforehand. It would be most inconvenient to release him only to rearrest him later. He cast a gentle glance at the inspector. We must avoid error for the sake of justice. Horbury nodded and placed a call on the room's telephone. As Elliston's door clicked open in the hall, the officers reappeared and released him. The solicitor returned, shaken but graciously composed, offering heartfelt apologies to Lady Beatrice before retreating to the library. A collective sigh of relief rose among the onlookers, but Poirot's expression remained inscrutable. Later, as the household settled into uneasy routines, Poirot invited Hastings to join him in the library. The walls were lined with heavy volumes on law, colonial trade, and English heritage, their leather spines gleaming in the lamplight. On a side table, the restored silver cigarette case gleamed beneath its dome, immaculate and mocking. Poirot poured 2 glasses of Madeira from a slender decanter. A toast, Hastings, he said, raising his glass, to the first false lead of our investigation. Hastings clinked his glass against Poirot's. To your little grey cells, mon ami, for spotting what the inspector's eyes overlooked. They sipped the rich wine, and Poirot's gaze drifted over the faint smudges of ink on the table's edge and the torn fragment displayed in a glassine envelope. Consider, my friend, that Mr. Elliston's motive, fee-based inheritance clauses, was trifling compared to others here. The true culprit wished to divert attention toward the solicitor's mess of red tape while they proceeded undetected. Hastings leaned forward. You think someone engineered Elliston's arrest deliberately? I do, Poirot affirmed. To buy themselves time. He paused, swirling the wine. The real murderer needed the household to believe the threat had come from within the legal quarters, whereas the fatal strike was aimed at silencing Sir Reginald before he could reveal a more damning secret. Which secret? Hastings asked. Poirot's moustaches twitched. The one hidden within the pages of his late wife's memoir, a document Sir Reginald kept secret. Within its margins lay an account of blackmail that could destroy reputations far more surely than a quarrel over investments. Hastings raised an eyebrow. But he never mentioned those memoirs. Precisely. Poirot tapped the glassine envelope. Because he intended to present them at tomorrow's luncheon, proof of extortion against someone in this very house. Our culprit discovered his plan and acted preemptively. Hastings whistled softly. Brilliant, Poirot. The detective's eyes gleamed. Now, we must identify who among the remaining suspects had both access to those memoirs and the means to stage our false lead. We continue tomorrow, clearing away the illusions until only the truth remains. Outside the library window, the Mayfair street lamps flickered to life, casting long shadows across the manicured garden. Inside, the silver dome glimmered on the side table, a symbol of the illusions yet to be shattered. And in the quiet of the library, Poirot's mind danced through possibilities, each more elaborate than the last, as he closed in on the true architect of the staged crime. Chapter 7. The Psychological Game. That evening the drawing-room's heavy draperies were drawn tight against the chill, and the glow of shaded lamps cast warm ovals upon the carpet. Poirot had requested the presence of all household members, promising a little tête-à-tête, a psychological exercise, he called it. One by one, the suspects filtered in. Lady Beatrice, still wrapped in lavender silk, though her cheeks were hollowed by worry. Colonel Carrington, erect and pale, his uniform immaculate despite the day's turmoil. Mr. Fielding, rumpled in his gardener's coat, yet eyes keen with defiance. Merton and Miss Pryor exchanging furtive glances, and by special invitation Mr. Elliston, whose acquittal had come as abruptly as his arrest. Poirot stood before the silver-domed cigarette case, which gleamed like an irresistible prize. He raised a gloved hand for silence. "Mes amis," he began, voice suave. "Tonight we shall play a small game of observation. I will ask a question, and I wish each of you to respond in turn, not with words alone, but with your faces, hands, and posture. For it is not always what one says, but how one betrays oneself in saying it." A tense hush fell. Hastings, seated in his usual place, jotted down the moment. Poirot turned first to Lady Beatrice. "My lady, tell us, what is your greatest fear currently? Losing your father, losing your inheritance, or losing the love of Colonel Carrington?" He watched her closely. Beatrice's hand fluttered to her throat. She drew a quivering breath. "Losing my father," she said at last, eyes shining. "Without him, all else is empty." Yet as she spoke, her gaze drifted involuntarily toward Carrington, and her fingers closed in a pale knot on the arm of her chair. Poirot nodded. "Thank you. Next, Colonel Carrington, what feels to you the greatest injustice inflicted upon you by Sir Reginald Thorn?" The Colonel's jaw tightened, and he leaned forward. "His threat to withdraw my allowance," he said, voice measured. "Years of service and sacrifice undone by a whim." He paused, eyes glancing at Beatrice. "And perhaps the insinuation that I would marry for money rather than affection." Poirot's moustaches twitched. "Indeed, and yet, my friend," he said, "love and money often dance together." He turned to Mr. Fielding. "Mr. Fielding, would you not agree that being denied your rightful lease is a truer sting than a missed handshake?" Fielding's large hands gripped the back of his chair. His voice was low and gravelly. My family's livelihood was in that lease, he promised, and then withdrew. Justice demands recompense." He looked around as though daring others to dissent. Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Ah, justice, a word that can justify many deeds." He faced Merton. "And you, Merton, whose loyalty to the Thorn family is unquestioned. What would you sacrifice to preserve your place here?" The butler's cheeks colored beneath his powder-white complexion. He swallowed. "Everything, monsieur. I owe my life to this household. Without service to the Thorns, I am nothing." Poirot's gaze softened momentarily before he addressed Miss Pryor. "Miss Pryor, you have witnessed more in these halls than most. Tell me, what secret knowledge do you guard most closely?" She started, then pressed her lips together, brow furrowing. "I guard the family's reputation," she said quietly. Yet her eyes flicked to Merton, and a faint tension hovered between them, as though the secret she kept bound them both. Finally, Poirot turned to Mr. Elliston. "And you, sir, having been both suspect and freedman, what truth troubles you most? That you were falsely accused, or that someone else escaped suspicion?" Elliston's face flashed with indignation. "That I, an officer of the law, was treated as a villain," he replied. "But more troubling is that the real criminal remains at large." Poirot folded his hands. "Excellent. You see, mes amis, each emotion is a clue. Fear, resentment, loyalty, shame. These are the clay from which motives are molded. Yet a murderer must hide not only the deed, but the emotion that drove it." He paused, letting the room's tension gather. Then, shifting tactics, he produced a small, battered leather key. This key was found in Sir Reginald's study. He held it aloft. It opens a secret drawer in his desk, a compartment containing his late wife's memoirs. Within those pages lies proof of blackmail that could destroy one of you. A collective intake of breath echoed. Beatrice's hand flew to her mouth. Carrington's eyes narrowed, Elliston stiffened, Fielding's brow darkened, Merton's knuckles whitened, Prior's shoulders tensed. Poirot continued, voice softer now. I have good reason to believe that the attempt on Sir Reginald's life was to prevent that document's revelation. I further believe that the document was removed from the desk before our first search. He studied each face in turn, seeking the slightest tremor. Beatrice's lips trembled, not from grief, but fear. Carrington's nostrils flared, a brief flash of something like guilt. Elliston's smile was too bright. Fielding's jaw clenched. Merton's eyes darted. Miss Prior's gaze lowered. And yet, Poirot said, arching a finger, the document was not found tucked away in a safe place. It remains where? His eyes settled on Miss Prior. You retrieved it, did you not, to protect someone's reputation, and then hid it here in the drawing-room, beneath the cushions of your favorite settee? Miss Prior started, as though struck. She glanced at Merton, who looked away. Monsieur Poirot, I only did what I thought right. I did not mean for anyone to be hurt. Poirot inclined his head. Your intentions may have been noble, but the result was tragic. You failed to foresee that removing the document would provoke a violent panic attack in Sir Reginald upon discovering its absence. Miss Prior's eyes filled. He gasped and fell. I thought he'd harmed himself. She shook. I panicked. Hastings spoke from his seat. Surely you didn't instruct the poisoning, or the staging with ink? Miss Prior lifted her gaze, defiance mingling with fear. No, I would never harm him. But I confess, I staged the dome and the spilled tea, hoping to delay discovery until I could return the memoir and explain. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. And so you orchestrated a tableau of confusion, intending to save reputation, not life. Yet the poisoned tea was never prepared. The ink smear and torn letter were your frantic handiwork to obscure your removal of the memoir. A hush followed. Miss Prior pressed her hands against her lips, tears gleaming. Merton stepped forward. Eleanor, I tried to help, and Oh! He pressed a hand to his brow. I covered for her, but I didn't think. Poirot raised a hand. You both panicked, believing the worst. But one more question remains. He turned to Colonel Carrington. Colonel, you who boasted of loyalty, did you suspect Miss Prior's motive, and did you assist her in any way? Carrington's face paled. He swallowed hard. I merely held her hand and whispered that all would be forgiven. I did not counsel deception. Poirot's eyes sparkled. A kind act, yet guilt can masquerade as compassion. You gave her courage, but also the confidence to stage that misleading scene. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle on Carrington's shoulders. Silence reigned. Poirot folded his arms. The true culprit, therefore, is not one single person, but the union of misguided motives, loyalty, love, and fear, woven into a tapestry of chaos. Yet chaos is no substitute for truth. Tomorrow, we shall untangle this web completely, and each of you must bear the consequences of your roles in this sorry affair. As the suspects departed in stunned silence, Miss Prior cast one last glance toward the locked desk drawer. Hastings closed his notebook with a sigh. That was extraordinary, Poirot. You laid bare their motives as though they were naked before us. Poirot allowed himself a faint smile. The mind is the most transparent chamber, my friend, if you know where to look. But transparency, like glass, shatters under pressure, and tomorrow we shall see which shards remain. Chapter 8. A Secondary Mystery. The dawn brought no solace to Thorn House. As the household stirred, a new alarm rang through its corridors. The late Sir Reginald's private study had been breached. Inspector Horbury rushed to the scene alongside Poirot and Hastings, their footsteps echoing against polished parquet floors. Where once the desk's secret drawer had held the precious memoir and its incriminating revelations, it now yawned empty. Worse yet, the lock itself had been forced, splintering wood around its frame. Poirot removed his gloves and examined the fractured lock. "Remarkable," he murmured. "Someone entered after our meeting last night. They sought the memoir but found nothing." He turned to the inspector. "We must treat this as more than a simple theft. It is a calculated attempt to remove evidence." Hastings, notebook in hand, peered at the desk. "And whoever did this re-entered the house undetected. The alarm below mentioned footsteps on the east terrace again." Poirot not detected. "The alarm below mentioned footsteps on the east terrace again." Poirot nodded. "Our culprit is bold, Hastings. Bold and desperate." He tapped the splintered wood gently. "They believed the memoir remained in this compartment. Now they must search elsewhere, and soon. But what they did not anticipate is that we anticipated them." He extracted a tiny fragment of parchment from his pocket. "I swapped the memoir for a decoy copy last evening, knowing a second attempt to steal it was imminent." He unfolded the paper. "These are the pages they left behind, fragments torn in frustration. Note the handwriting differs from Sir Reginald's careful script." Inspector Horbury frowned. "Another torn letter." Poirot laid the parchment on the desk. It bore a stark message in hurried black ink. "You cannot save them all. Stop your meddling, or more will suffer." Hastings' eyes narrowed. A direct threat, intended for Sir Reginald. But since he lies unconscious, perhaps the real target lies among the living. "Precisely." Poirot mirrored Hastings' glance toward Lady Beatrice, who stood nearby, pale and breathless. She had been summoned at once, clutching a lace handkerchief. "My lady," Poirot said gently, "you had reason to fear for your inheritance, but now you fear for your very life." Beatrice's voice trembled. "I received a letter last night, but I thought it a prank and left it on my dressing table. I didn't read it until I came to you this morning." Poirot inclined his head. "Would you fetch it, please?" She hurried to retrieve a folded note from her purse and handed it to him. He unfolded it carefully. "One life saved, one more at risk. Beware the gardener's revenge. He holds more than soil beneath his fingernails." Merton covered his mouth in shock. Fielding's face darkened. Pryor and Elliston exchanged anxious looks. Carrington's jaw tightened. Poirot studied Beatrice's eyes. "My lady, did you show this to anyone?" "No," she whispered. "I was terrified. I locked it away and hoped it would go away." "As did our first threat," Poirot observed, "and yet here we see a pattern. Threats via stolen pages, warnings against continued investigation, and naming of a suspect by occupation rather than by name." He tapped the paper. "The mention of the gardener echoes Mr. Elliston's misplaced accusation earlier, and the inspector's hurried arrest of Mr. Elliston. A clever misdirection." Inspector Horbury looked to Fielding. "Mr. Fielding, these threats accuse you of malice. How do you respond?" Fielding straightened, shoulders squared. I am no killer. If I wished revenge, I would demand compensation, not fear. I love this house, its grounds, and its master. I would never harm them." Poirot raised a gloved hand. Emotion can be a veil for truth, but let us examine the means. Only someone with intricate knowledge of the house's secret passages could enter the study without detection. The gardener has access to the service corridors, yes, but so do the staff and Mr. Carrington, who knows Sir Reginald's study well from their financial consultations. Carrington stiffened. "I have no need to infiltrate a locked study. I am concerned only with my honor." "And yet your honor could be threatened," Poirot countered. "Sir Reginald's memoirs contain revelations that could sully reputations, yours included." He turned to Merton. "You arranged the dome over the cigarette case last night under Miss Pryor's guidance. You know the pattern of household inspections." Merton swallowed. "I was anxious, sir. I did not know of this theft." Poirot nodded. "Anxiety can blind us, as we shall see. But focus, mes amis. Our secondary mystery is twofold: the disappearance of the memoir and a fresh attempt at intimidation through threats bound to sow discord." He retrieved the decoy memoir from his coat. Its cover was unremarkable, yet Poirot stroked its spine thoughtfully. "This decoy will serve as bait. We must let the thief believe they have acquired the real memoir. They will reveal themselves when they seek to exploit its contents." Hastings frowned. "And in the meantime, we have a missing key witness, Sir Reginald." "Precisely," Poirot agreed. "Our time is limited. I shall remain with the decoy in the study under watchful guard. You, Hastings, will interview the gardener again. Inspect the service corridors for fresh footprints." He turned to Lady Beatrice. "My lady, I pray you remain within sight of Merton until you feel safe again. And Colonel Carrington," he said, addressing the assembled officer, "I trust you will uphold your promise of loyalty by aiding our guard." Carrington inclined his head stiffly. "I shall remain at Lady Beatrice's side." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Excellent. Now, let us proceed. Hastings, we begin with the service stairs at the west corner. You may discover that the thief's haste belies familiarity, and familiarity may lead us to the culprit's identity." As Hastings departed, Poirot lingered in the study's half-light, gazing at the empty drawer and the fresh lock splinters. Behind him, the decoy memoir rested, its pages unread yet alive with potential. Outside, the wind stirred the budding roses, and within, the house's hush held its breath once more. A second mystery had taken root, layering the original crime with a renewed urgency, and in that intertwined web of theft and threat, Poirot sensed the true culprit edging closer to an irreversible blunder. Chapter 9. Hidden Connections. Late that afternoon, a weary Hastings returned from his circuit of the service corridors, soil-smeared but triumphant. He burst into the study where Poirot sat beside the decoy memoir, its cover innocuous under the desk lamp's glow. "Monsieur, I have good news," Hastings announced, depositing a pair of muddy boots on the mat and spreading a set of footprints on blotting paper. "These prints lead from the gardener's shed to the east wing, but curious patterns suggest someone crossed in cleaned footwear, transferring the mud from beneath their soles. It seems our intruder changed shoes mid-route." Poirot steepled his fingers. "Fascinating. The gardener's boots bear deep treads, yes, but these tracks are shallower, resembling Miss Pryor's slipper heels." He examined the blotting imprint. "I conclude that Miss Pryor accompanied Mr. Fielding or used his path to avoid detection." He paused, eyes narrowing. "Yet why involve her in a burglary of the memoir, unless their secrets intersect?" Hastings frowned. Miss Pryor said she hid the memoir to protect Lady Beatrice's reputation, not for personal gain. If she sought help, she might have enlisted Fielding, whose loyalty lies to the Thorns. Poirot nodded. A plausible alliance of convenience. Eleanor's knowledge of hidden passages combined with Fielding's mobility. But let us not overlook that Mr. Elliston also possesses keys to the private study and intimate familiarity with its contents. He fingered the decoy's binding thoughtfully. The solicitor, too, could recruit an accomplice. Indeed, I see threads weaving this web ever tighter. They rose and left the study, stepping into the library where Colonel Carrington awaited, polishing the silver dome with nervous precision. Lady Beatrice sat nearby, eyes red-rimmed, hands folded in her lap. Merton hovered at the periphery, and Mr. Fielding leaned against a bookcase. Miss Pryor remained absent, summoned earlier to the nursery to calm Sir Reginald's recovering condition. Poirot swept the room with a gracious nod. Mes amis, it appears our secondary mystery has revealed a hidden alliance, or perhaps two. I thank you for your patience. Now, I propose we lay each connection bare, starting with the most obvious. He turned first to Mr. Fielding. You share with Miss Pryor both motive and means, the motive of injustice, the means of clandestine passage. Did you guide her along the service corridors last night? Fielding unfolded his arms. I escorted her through the old servant's stair to retrieve the memoir. She feared my boots would betray her, so she borrowed mine and later returned them to the shed. Then you confessed to collaboration? Poirot pressed. Yet your intention was noble, to preserve the family's honor? Fielding bowed his head. Yes, I believed removing the memoir would spare my lady further distress. However, Poirot interjected, one must be wary of misguided chivalry. Without Miss Pryor's foresight and your passage, the threat letters would not have sufficed to intimidate. You both engineered misdirection. Fielding's gaze lifted defiantly. Better a staged burglary than unmasking scandal. He turned to Elliston. And you, sir? What alliance served your purpose? Mr. Elliston closed his portfolio slowly. I acted alone in drafting the decoy will clause. I did not recruit another. His voice trembled. My partnership was only with my conscience. Poirot's moustaches quivered. A singular partnership is no alliance. Yet you conferred with Colonel Carrington before yesterday's luncheon, did you not? Words overheard by the housekeeper mentioned shared interests regarding the memoir's contents. Carrington's color drained. I discussed investments with Elliston, but not the memoir. He pressed a hand to his temple. I wished only to protect my reputation, which would suffer if those pages emerged. And so, Poirot said, you and Elliston found common cause in fear. Fear breeds alliances both open and covert. He paused, letting the gravity of his words sink in. But beyond these partnerships lies a deeper bond, one stretching across station and rank. He pivoted to Lady Beatrice. My lady, you have borrowed funds from Colonel Carrington to settle your debts, have you not? Your refusal of marriage was halted by your own financial difficulties. Beatrice's lips trembled. I admitted to needing support, but I would never jeopardize my father's trust. Poirot inclined his head. Yet the financial entanglement between you and Colonel Carrington created a triangular tension, love, debt, and duty, each pulling your hearts in conflicting directions. He turned to Merton. And you, what web binds you to Miss Pryor? The butler hesitated, gaze flicking to the maid's vacant seat. I have cared for this household longer than any living soul. I promised Miss Pryor I would protect her from shame, her indiscretion with the gardener. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Yes, your loyalty to Miss Pryor is born of compassion for an affair that would ruin both your careers. In shielding her, you also became her ally in secrecy, and thus complicit in the hiding of that memoir. Merton lowered his head. I would do anything to preserve order here. So we find alliances of love, loyalty, financial interest, and fear, each weaving a network of hidden connections, Poirot concluded. These relationships provided cover and motive. Yet the true mastermind needs only one accomplice, and that one is the person who most benefits from both you, alliance, and misdirection. He turned to Hastings. Observe the patterns, the slippered prints, the hurried handwriting on the threat letter, the mismatched soil, and the timing of the two thefts. Which suspect's movements align most consistently with these clues? Hastings closed his eyes in concentration. Miss Pryor's slippers, Fielding's boots, Elliston's handwriting, Merton's alibi. But if Miss Pryor borrowed Fielding's boots and Merton shielded her, she played a pivotal role. And who benefits most from the memoir's disappearance? Poirot asked, voice low. Not merely from its contents, but from the chaos it sowed among friends and family. Silence reigned. Beatrice folded her hands. Carrington stared at his polished cufflinks. Elliston tapped nervously. Fielding's arms twitched. Merton swallowed hard. Poirot's final words floated in the charged air. The person who stands to gain greatest advantage, financially, emotionally, or reputationally, is one who moved unseen among these alliances, orchestrating both distraction and theft. We are close to discovering not only what binds you together, but who stands apart as the puppeteer in this theater of shadows. He turned to Inspector Horbury, who had watched in grave silence. Let us reconvene tomorrow, when the little grey cells have passed these connections further. Until then, I advise no suspect sleep easy, for the true culprit's identity draws near to revelation. As the group dispersed, each lost in private contemplation, Poirot remained in the library's hush, charting the web of alliances in his mind. The hidden connections were now illuminated, and from their intersections, the cunning figure who pulled the strings would soon be unmasked. Chapter 10. Poirot's Secret Clue. The next morning, a fine drizzle veiled Mayfair's streets, and within Sir Reginald's drawing-room, an atmosphere of tense expectancy prevailed. Inspector Horbury had arranged for a fresh examination of the clock mechanism, the pendulum weight having been carefully unhooked and set aside for analysis. Hastings stood by the mantel, recording each movement in his ever-present notebook, while the remaining household members assembled with anxious composure. Poirot entered, cane in hand, his grey eyes alight with anticipation. Without a word, he moved toward the clock and gently lifted its face, revealing the inner workings. The inspector and Colonel Carrington peered over his shoulder. Lady Beatrice hovered nearby, handkerchief clutched tightly, and Merton and Fielding exchanged uneasy glances. Miss Pryor, summoned at last, stood just inside the doorway, her expression guarded. Poirot's gloved fingertips touched the pendulum's slender rod. "Observe," he said softly, "this engraving upon the weight." He rotated the weight to display 4 delicate letters, ECF. Hastings leaned in, adjusting his spectacles for a closer look. ECF, Hastings repeated. "We saw EC before on the torn letter, and the clock key. Is the F new?" Poirot nodded. "Indeed. Why would these initials appear here hidden from casual view? They are not the clockmaker's mark, nor belong to the Thorn family, and yet they correspond to someone present. His gaze travelled slowly from Colonel Carrington to Mr. Fielding, then to Miss Pryor, whose lips parted in surprise. Fielding's brows furrowed. "My initials are C.F., not E. C.F." "Ah, but in reverse," Poirot said, tapping the weight. "You might inscribe F.C. stand for Fielding, but E.C.F. suggests three names, first, middle, and last, of which only one set matches these letters exactly." Miss Pryor's hand flew to her breast. "Eleanor Caroline Pryor. My initials would be E.C.P." Poirot's moustaches quivered. "Quite so. We are left with one pairing. Edmund Charles Carrington, E.C.C., and Philip Edward Elliston, P.E.E., neither of which match precisely. But consider Mr. Fielding's full name, Edgar Charles Fielding." He held the weight aloft. "Thus E.C.F." Hastings's eyes widened. Edgar Charles Fielding. So the gardener's true name, and the secret in his name, was etched here. Fielding swallowed hard. I never thought to hide my middle name from anyone." "Yet you did hide it," Poirot continued. "Sir Reginald had discovered that you adopted the name Edgar to mask your lineage. A Thorn cousin disavowed decades past. You returned under an assumed identity to reclaim your inheritance." Fielding's shoulders slumped. "I confess it was I who forced the memoir's removal, believing it contained proof that my grandfather had been unjustly disinherited." Poirot folded his arms. "That explains your intimate knowledge of the secret passages and the service corridors. You confided in Miss Pryor, trusting her discretion." He turned to Miss Pryor. "You aided him out of misplaced loyalty, staging the dome and ink smears to divert suspicion." Miss Pryor's eyes brimmed. "He told me of his true identity and begged me to help him. But I never imagined it would lead to such peril." Poirot nodded gravely. "And the torn letters, the first threats, all designed to frighten Sir Reginald into restoring the inheritance, not to kill him. Yet your panic escalated events beyond control." Hastings interjected. "But why the second threat, naming the gardener?" He did not doubt that the memoir was the motive. Poirot allowed a faint smile. He needed to threaten Lady Beatrice to keep her from interfering. He believed that by insinuating Fielding's guilt, all eyes would fall upon the gardener, leaving him free to negotiate with Sir Reginald undisturbed. Lady Beatrice's voice trembled. "So father was never in danger of poisoning, only of shock and betrayal?" "Exactly," Poirot confirmed. "No poison was ever used. The ink and tea were theatrics. The true injuries were those of trust and blood pressure." Inspector Horbury stepped forward. "Monsieur Poirot, this revelation alters everything. Mr. Fielding, you will come with us to explain your actions." Fielding bowed his head. "I will face justice for my deceit, but know that my intentions were guided by family honor." Poirot turned to the others. "Each of you played a role, some knowingly, others unwittingly, in this drama of concealment. But now that the secret is out, the path to resolution lies open." He paused, lifting his chin. "We have unmasked the hidden identity. Tomorrow we shall confront Sir Reginald with this truth and allow his recovery to deliver final justice." As the household members retired, subdued by the weight of disclosures, Hastings closed his notebook with satisfaction. "Remarkable, Poirot. That single engraving unearthed the gardener's true identity." Poirot tapped his temple. "It is the smallest clue, the secret engraving hidden from view, that often illuminates the darkest mysteries. And with our little grey cells thus enriched, the final pieces fall swiftly into place." Outside, the drizzle had ceased. leaving the air fresh and new. Within Thorn House, however, the day's revelations lingered like a fragrance, intense, inescapable, and destined to transform every life it touched. Chapter 11. Tensions Rise. The drawing-room thrummed with unsettled energy as afternoon light slanted through the tall windows. Inspector Horbury had just led. Edgar Charles Fielding, his true identity now revealed, toward the front hall, where awaiting officers would escort him away. A hush fell over the assembled household. Lady Beatrice clutched a silk handkerchief. Colonel Carrington's uniform looked oddly slack, and Mr. Elliston's pen hovered unsteadily above a ledger. Miss Pryor stood nearest the hearth, shoulders stooped, and Merton hovered behind her, eyes anxious yet resolute. Poirot remained in the center, hands clasped behind his back, surveying the shifting faces. "Mes amis," he called gently, "we have unmasked one strand in our intricate tapestry, but the strands left behind still tug at hidden ends." He inclined his head toward Lady Beatrice. "My lady, your shock is understandable. Will you join me by the window?" She floated to his side, the hem of her lavender gown whispering against the carpet. Outside, the garden's budding roses swayed in a sudden breeze, as though echoing her quivering breaths. Poirot offered a compassionate smile. "Your courage has not faltered, though your emotions run deep. Pray, tell me what troubles you most now." Beatrice inhaled, lifting trembling fingers. "Father lies unconscious, his faith betrayed by one he trusted as kin. And yet, I fear I too have been deceived." She swallowed. "I believed I knew each of you." Poirot's grey eyes softened. "Trust, once broken, can leave us adrift. But we must chart a new course if we are to see this matter fully resolved." He placed a gloved hand on her arm. "You are not alone." Across the room, Colonel Carrington approached, each step measured. His shoulders squared as he addressed Beatrice. "My lady," he said quietly, "if it comforts you, know that I would never harm your father, or you." He bowed his head. "My loyalty remains, regardless of my own debts or doubts." Beatrice turned, her gaze flickering between him and Poirot. "Yet you allied with Mr. Elliston in fear of scandal, and did nothing to stop Miss Pryor's rash enactments." Her voice trembled on the edge of accusation. Carrington's jaw clenched. "I counseled caution, yes, but I did not orchestrate theft. If I erred, it was in trusting those I believed honorable." Miss Pryor's quiet voice startled them both. She stepped forward, hands clasped, startled them both. She stepped forward, hands clasped. "Colonel, you spoke of honor, yet you sought to bind me in secrecy. If you truly cared for me, you would have guided me to the truth, not through shadows." Her eyes glistened. "I did what I thought best, only to plunge us into jeopardy." The Colonel's face paled. "Eleanor, you misjudge me. I wished to protect you." "Protect me," she echoed, voice wavering, "or protect your reputation?" He faltered, gaze dropping. "Both." A silence thickened, broken only by ticking from the restored clock. Poirot raised a finger. "Love, loyalty, fear, each emotion has driven your actions. But now, you must choose whether to let these passions cloud your judgment further." He turned to Elliston. "Mr. Elliston, you oversaw the legal entanglements that sparked this chain of events. Do you feel, now that the gardener's true identity is exposed, that your complicity in staging the decoy memorandum weighs upon your conscience?" Elliston's shoulders slumped. He set aside his portfolio and approached the group. "Yes," he admitted, voice low. "I sought to distract suspicion from myself, believing my involvement purely academic. I regret deeply that others suffered in my folly." Beatrice's eyes met Elliston's. "Your regret is noted, Mr. Elliston, but regret does not undo betrayal." Merton cleared his throat, stepping forward for the first time. "If I may," he began, voice steady. "I took Miss Prior's side because I felt her panic and mine might spare the family further pain, but in shielding secrets, we allowed them to fester." He pressed a handkerchief to his chest. "I, too, apologize." Fielding, his wrists bound in soft handcuffs, lingered at the hall's threshold. He turned back, gaze somber. "My grandfather's injustice haunted me. I believed that recovering what was stolen from my lineage would set right a wrong. Instead, I compounded it." His voice cracked. "I have been both thief and victim of lies." As each spoke, the drawing-room's air hummed with unease. Poirot observed each confession, noting tremors in voices and eyes fixed on others. He tapped his cane lightly. "Now, my friends, the tensions woven by fear and secrecy have reached a peak. Each of you stands unveiled, yet not entirely unburdened." He walked to the silver-domed cigarette case, lifting its cover to reveal the gleaming surface beneath. "This case, like this house, has shown us reflections, some clear, some distorted. It is imperative now that we decide. Shall we allow old resentments to tear us further apart, or face the truth that binds us?" Colonel Carrington stepped forward, placing a steady hand on Beatrice's shoulder. "I have been a fool guided by pride. My debts, my fears, they led me to counsel secrecy rather than transparency." He bowed his head. "I ask for your forgiveness." Beatrice's eyes glistened. She turned to Miss Prior. "And you, Eleanor, I am grateful for your devotion, even if misdirected. Let us find a way to heal these wounds, rather than sow new ones." Miss Prior's shoulders sagged with relief. She approached Merton and embraced him wearily. "I was afraid of disgrace, but I see now that honesty is the only balm." Elliston nodded. "And I shall amend all legal errors, restoring what must be restored, publicly and without fear." Poirot's moustaches quivered in gentle approval. "Ah, the beginnings of resolution. Yet beware. Sincerity after deceit can be as fragile as the thin glass that once shielded our cigarette case. If one among you still harbors secret motives—" He let his gaze drift meaningfully around the circle. "The tensions will rise anew." Inspector Horbury stepped forward. "Monsieur Poirot, shall we resume the count of evidence?" Poirot inclined his head. "Yes. Tomorrow we reconvene to follow the final threads, to restore not only the memoir, but the trust this household requires. Until then, I advise you to rest, reflect, and steel your hearts for what remains." As he spoke, the late afternoon light faded, and the lantern's glow deepened the room's shadows. Each face, now laid bare, seemed poised on the brink of either reconciliation or renewed conflict. And in that charged hush, Poirot's little grey cells spun ever onward, knitting together the final strands of this tangled affair. Chapter 12. The Confrontation. Late in the afternoon, Poirot summoned the assembled household once more to the drawing-room. A pall of expectation hung heavy. Lady Beatrice sat by the window with Colonel Carrington at her side. Mr. Elliston stood near the fireplace, clutching his portfolio. Miss Prior and Merton exchanged anxious glances. Even Inspector Horbury, normally impervious, shifted from foot to foot. At the center of the room, Edgar Charles Fielding, no longer gardener but exposed usurper of a name, stood bound by polite constraints, his posture rigid. Poirot entered, cane in hand, moustaches impeccably groomed. He paused, allowing his gaze to sweep over each face, then turned deliberately to Fielding. "Monsieur Fielding," he began softly, "you have confessed to removing the memoir and enlisting Miss Prior's aid. Yet I sense there remains a final layer of deception. Pray, tell us again where you concealed the real memoir after taking it from the secret drawer." Fielding's mouth tightened. "I placed it in the greenhouse, Monsieur Poirot, between the rose trellis and the potting benches. I intended to retrieve it once I had spoken with Sir Reginald." His voice was steady, but his eyes flickered to the French doors. Poirot inclined his head. "In the greenhouse, you say? And yet this afternoon you denied having been there. Did you not when I inquired about footprints on the west terrace?" Fielding's eyes widened imperceptibly. I may have forgotten, Père, that I entered by the Lily House door." He paused, realizing too late that he had stumbled over the wrong entrance. "But the memoir was indeed hidden there." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Monsieur Fielding, the only footprints leading to the Lily House were those of Colonel Carrington's polished boots, no mislaid mud, no slippered heels. Your boots, which you wore to conceal your identity, bear a distinct tread inconsistent with passage through damp soil under glass panels." He tacked a sheet of blotting paper on the table, displaying a clear impression. "This print, taken from the greenhouse floor, matches Colonel Carrington's footwear." A murmur rippled through the room. Carrington's face blanched. Fielding's lips parted in shock. "No," he whispered. Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. "There is more." He moved to the rosewood sideboard and produced the decoy memoir, its cover now marked by the faint bloodstain of Sir Reginald's shock. "When I placed this copy in your hand for safekeeping, you were alone in the library. I entrusted it to you, hoping that the real thief would reveal themselves by retrieving it. Yet you insist you never saw this volume, contradicting your confession." Fielding's pupils contracted. I was overwhelmed. I did not think, Poirot repeated gently, that deception alone would suffice. You presumed that removing the original memoir and compelling Miss Prior to stage misdirection would grant you safe passage. Instead, you exposed yourself by fear of being seen with this volume, fear of your cousin's discovery, fear of the past you sought to bury. Fielding turned toward Hastings, desperation coloring his voice. "You must understand. I did it all for the right reasons." Hastings folded his notebook. "Tell us, then, how does staging threats in your own handwriting absolve you of wrongdoing? And why use jasmine's scent to mask the ink's odor, unless you knew the tea would never be drunk?" Fielding's shoulders slumped. He covered his face momentarily with a trembling hand, then forced himself to look up. "I thought the threats would scare Sir Reginald into a private meeting. He would restore my grandfather's share of the estate. Then I would return the memoir, and all would be well. The ink and jasmine. I admit that was Miss Prior's idea, to make it appear as if tea were involved. I went along, believing it was harmless theatrics." Poirot leaned on his cane. "Harmless, until Sir Reginald's heart failed him upon discovering his memoir missing and his daughter endangered." He let the words hang. "You did not intend to kill, yet you did not foresee that panic is a more lethal poison than any alkaloid." Beatrice's voice, tremulous but firm, broke the silence. "You took my father's trust and turned it into a weapon. You called yourself family, yet you treated him as an adversary." Fielding bowed his head. "I was never truly family. I reinvented myself. I thought I'd right a historic wrong, but I betrayed every bond I claimed." Poirot turned to Inspector Horbury. Monsieur Fielding's confession speaks for itself, yet the law requires one more confirmation: the location of the original memoir. Fielding swallowed. It is still in the greenhouse, beneath the trellis, in the clay pot marked with 2 white stripes. Horbury gave the order, and officers swiftly retrieved the genuine memoir, its leather cover mottled with damp earth. They presented it before the group. Poirot lifted it reverently. "Now, justice may proceed." He returned the volume to the sideboard and addressed the household. "We have unearthed the hidden motives, exposed the twisted loyalties, and confronted the architect of this misbegotten plot. Yet it falls upon each of you to heal the fractures wrought by misunderstanding and secrecy." Miss Pryor stepped forward, voice trembling. "I am sorry. I never wished harm beyond a hidden document." She glanced at Fielding. "I only meant to protect him." Carrington reached out to her. "We will face the consequences together, but not as conspirators, as survivors of a secret that should never have been." Lady Beatrice inhaled, smoothing her gown. "Let this be the last time we hide our truths. Only in transparency can we rebuild what was broken." Poirot inclined his head. "Ah, but the final act remains, to see that Sir Reginald, once revived, forgives as well as he must judge." He turned to Fielding, who stood at the threshold. "Monsieur Fielding, prepare yourself. Tomorrow you will stand before the magistrate. Yet today, know that your confession spares you from harsher reckonings." Fielding's shoulders slumped in relief, tinged with sorrow. He offered a curt nod. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot." As the household dispersed, tension lingering like the scent of jasmine in the air, Poirot remained in the center of the room. His little grey cells, having navigated labyrinths of deception and motive, now rested upon the final act, preparing the great reveal that would restore order, breathe life into Sir Reginald, and deliver the elegant justice only he could orchestrate. Chapter 13. A desperate attempt to escape. A tense stillness settled over Thorn House that evening, broken only by the distant ticking of the restored grandfather clock. The household had retired to their quarters, each soul burdened by the day's revelations, while Inspector Horbury and his officers maintained a watch in the drawing-room. Poirot remained beside the decoy memoir, its pages closed atop the rosewood sideboard, his little grey cells simmering with quiet vigilance. Shortly after dinner, a piercing alarm shattered the hush. The sound came from the greenhouse, where the genuine memoir lay hidden. Poirot and Horbury dashed through the corridors, lanterns flickering on damp stone, to find that the greenhouse door had been forced open. Broken glass glinted on the gravel path, and inside, the pot bearing 2 white stripes lay overturned, its contents scattered. "Mon Dieu!" Hastings exclaimed, examining the clay pot. "He's come for it again." Poirot knelt by the scattered soil and earth-browned pages. "Yes," and in haste. "The thief does not learn from a single capture." He gently lifted several damp pages, then paused, eyes narrowing. "Note the footprints here. Shallow, slippered, for Miss Pryor. And here," he pointed to deeper tread marks, "Fielding's boots." Inspector Horbury barked orders. "Secure the greenhouse. No one enters or leaves." Yet as the lantern light swept across the shattered glass, a figure lurched from behind the rose trellis. Edgar Charles Fielding, his coat collar turned up, clutching the damp manuscript. Fielding's eyes burned with panic. "I must finish this. I cannot let it fall into father's hands, not until I have what is mine." Poirot stepped forward. "Monsieur Fielding, stand down." Fielding's jaw clenched. He thrust the manuscript toward the lantern's glow. "You do not understand. That memoir is my birthright. If he recovers and reads it, I will be cast out, penniless, disgraced. I'd rather destroy it and risk the consequences." He pulled a charred scrap of paper from his pocket, a matchstick burning at its tip. "I've come to burn it now, here in the greenhouse's damp air." Hastings moved to intervene, but Poirot raised a gloved hand. "Patience, Hastings. Observe." Fielding raised the scrap and applied flame to the pages. A thin curl of smoke drifted upward. He exhaled violently. "My family's wrongs must be corrected. I am tired of half measures." Poirot advanced, voice calm but firm. "Monsieur, consider. With each attempt, you compound your guilt. You sought restitution, but have wrought terror. Now you would commit arson and possible manslaughter, should flames spread." Fielding's shoulders slumped, as though the weight of his own words crushed him. He hesitated, gaze flickering between the burning paper and the gathered trio. Behind him the lantern's light caught Miss Prior's face, burning paper and the gathered trio. Behind him the lantern's light caught Miss Prior's face in the greenhouse doorway, her expression stricken. "You knew she would help again," Poirot continued softly. "Yet you betrayed her trust. Do you believe justice lies in darkness and flame?" Fielding's hand trembled. The flame licked the brittle parchment. I thought—" "No," Poirot said gently, stepping closer. He produced a small silver snuffer from his coat pocket. With a deliberate click, he extinguished the match and then the tiny fire atop the scrap. The manuscript fell, damp and smoulder-free, to the gravel. "Justice is not blind vengeance, monsieur, but a measured hand. You will not destroy what you once fought to recover." Inspector Horbury seized Fielding's arm. "You're under arrest again, for attempted arson." He motioned to his officers. "Search him, and secure the manuscript." Miss Prior rushed forward, kneeling to gather the discarded pages. "Edgar, her voice cracked. "But I thought I was helping you protect your secret." Fielding's head dropped. "I endangered everyone. He turned toward Hastings. "I lost myself." Poirot placed a steadying hand on Fielding's shoulder. "Mon ami, there remains time for contrition. You have revealed your deepest motive, not merely reclaiming inheritance but fear of disgrace. Now that fear drives you to desperate acts. But the law will judge, and mercy may yet temper justice." Hastings pocketed his notebook. "You're right, Poirot. He must face the consequences, but compassion should guide us now." As officers escorted Fielding back toward the entrance hall, manuscript secured under glass, Poirot addressed Inspector Horbury. "Ensure the genuine memoir is returned to the safe in Sir Reginald's study under lock and key, and notify the magistrate that Monsieur Fielding has attempted to destroy evidence anew." Horbury nodded. "It shall be done." Poirot watched them depart, then turned to Hastings and Miss Prior. "Let us inspect the greenhouse thoroughly, for traces of accelerant, footprints, and any clue left in haste." They knelt among the shattered pots and trampled gravel, collecting fragments of paper and lifting soil samples. Hastings found a small silver matchbox, its monogram a stag beneath a crescent moon, hidden beneath a bench. "The Thorn crest," he noted. "This belonged to Sir Reginald." Poirot examined the box. Indeed, someone took it from his study and brought it here to ignite the pages. That someone knew both the memoir's location and Sir Reginald's private effects. Miss Prior's face paled. I did not realize." Poirot's gaze was kind but firm. "None of you acted with malice at heart, but the sum of your actions became a maelstrom of deceit. Now we must ensure no further calamity occurs." Hastings rose, brushing gravel from his coat. "Do you think the mere presence of Fielding's tokens here confirms his guilt more thoroughly than his confession?" "Confession is vital," Poirot replied, "but corroboration by evidence makes it irrefutable. The Thorn matchbox, Fielding's boots, Miss Prior's slipper prints, each ties him to this desperate attempt." He looked up at the greenhouse's glass roof, streaked with drizzle. In the stillness of midnight's growth, a desperate spark sought to consume truth, but we have quenched it with reason. Miss Prior closed her eyes, tears shimmering. "I am sorry, sir. I won't help him again." Poirot placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Your remorse is clear, mademoiselle. It remains only to see that Sir Reginald, once he awakens, is made aware of these events, so that trust may be repaired." As they left the greenhouse, its lamps now extinguished, a soft wind rustled the trellis. The hidden shadows retreated, leaving only the damp earth and scattered rose petals. Within, Poirot's mind turned to the final gathering, where the household would confront the truth together. But for tonight, the desperate attempt to escape had been met and halted, and no further pages would burn. Chapter 14. The final piece falls into place. The following morning brought clear skies to Mayfair, but within Thorn House the air was thick with anticipation. Sir Reginald's condition had improved sufficiently that the doctor permitted whispered conversation at his bedside. Yet the drawing-room, now arranged for one last investigation, lay silent as Poirot and Hastings entered with purposeful steps. On a low table near the fireplace sat the genuine memoir, its damp pages now carefully dried and bound, and beside it a sealed envelope embossed with the Thorn crest. Poirot's gaze flicked between the two. "Hastings, our final piece awaits discovery in this envelope. Tell me, did you notice anything unusual about its seal?" Hastings, notebook open, considered. "It bears the same stag and crescent crest, but the wax is cracked at one corner, as though opened and resealed hastily." "Exactly." Poirot lifted the envelope and held it to the light. A faint crease ran through the wax, betraying prior tampering. He produced a slender letter opener and scored the seal with clinical precision. Inside lay a single sheet of heavy cream paper, upon which Sir Reginald's distinctive handwriting scrawled an addendum to his will. "To Edgar Charles Fielding, henceforth acknowledged as Edgar Charles Thorn, I bequeath 1/4 of my estate, absolute and irrevocable. Let no obstacle impede this rightful inheritance. R.T." Poirot allowed the letter to rest in Hastings's hand. "Note the clear intention. Sir Reginald intended to restore his cousin's share without dispute." He turned to Hastings. Fielding believed himself disinherited, and so he acted in desperation, ignorant of this instruction. Hastings's brow furrowed. He never saw this letter because it was placed in the drawer behind the hidden compartment, unbeknownst even to Miss Prior. "Precisely," Poirot agreed. "And this is the final piece, the explicit proof that Fielding's motives, though tragically misguided, were born of legitimate expectation. His actions, however unlawful, sprung from a misinterpretation, one that set him on a path of errors rather than violence." He closed his eyes briefly, picturing each suspect's reaction. "With this revelation, we may approach Sir Reginald. He has regained consciousness and can confirm his intentions firsthand." Poirot motioned Hastings to follow him into the adjacent hallway. They found Lady Beatrice perched beside her father's bed. Sir Reginald, pale but animated, held the memoir in one hand. His fingers trembled as he turned the pages. The nurse hovered discreetly, ready to attend. Poirot entered, bowing politely. "Sir Reginald, I trust you are stronger today?" Poirot inquired softly. The old lord offered a faint smile. The old lord offered a faint smile. "Monsieur Poirot, I am indebted to you. My mind clears like the morning fog." He held up the sealed will addendum. "I discovered this letter only upon waking, missed in the compartment's concealment. Pray tell me, what transpired in my absence?" Poirot explained succinctly the series of events: the staged tea, the torn letter, the decoy memoir, the collaboration of Miss Pryor and Fielding, and finally, the desperate greenhouse attempt. At each turn, Sir Reginald's eyes grew wider, and Lady Beatrice pressed her father's hand. When Poirot finished, Sir Reginald cleared his throat. "I see now how my secrecy, though intended to protect Edgar's reputation until the proper moment, wrought confusion and fear. My poor cousin believed me dead to him." He turned to Fielding, who had been summoned into the room under gentle escort. Fielding stood at the threshold, head bowed, wrists unbound, yet visible as a gesture of trust. "Edgar," Sir Reginald said, voice quavering, "I beg your forgiveness. My failure to inform you directly of this bequest led you to desperate acts. I never sought to disinherit you, only to choose the proper time to announce it." Fielding raised his eyes, moisture gleaming. "Cousin, I acted in haste and terror. I thought my birthright lost, forever." He stepped forward and knelt beside the bed, tears welling. "I have wronged you and all here. Yet I acted out of love for our shared name." Sir Reginald laid a frail hand on Fielding's shoulder. "Rise, Edgar Charles Thorn. Your name is true, and your share irrevocable." He motioned to Lady Beatrice. "My daughter, let us welcome him back." Beatrice rose swiftly and embraced Fielding, her lavender gown whispering through the quiet room. "Brother," she whispered, "you are ours, no less than before." Poirot observed the reconciliation with a faint smile, but his work was not yet done. He addressed Sir Reginald directly. "Monsieur, the final piece fell into place when we found your letter. Yet justice requires one more resolution. The accounts of Miss Pryor, Colonel Carrington, Mr. Elliston, and Merton." Sir Reginald nodded. "Let them speak." Poirot turned to Miss Pryor and Merton, who stood side by side. "You, Miss Pryor, removed the memoir out of loyalty, fearing scandal, and you, Merton, assisted her out of devotion." He paused, letting their confessions echo. "Your intentions were protective, yet they led to threats, theft, and endangerment. Sir Reginald, how shall you judge?" Sir Reginald considered, then spoke firmly. "Eleanor, you acted to shield me, yet your secrecy cost everyone grief. I pardon you both, on condition that the memoir's contents be made public at tomorrow's luncheon, so that transparency replaces hiding once and for all." A murmur of relief passed through the room. Poirot then addressed Colonel Carrington and Mr. Elliston. "You, gentlemen, formed an alliance of fear, altering Sir Reginald's financial counsel to delay announcement, further complicating Edgar's expectations." He turned to Elliston. "You will adjust all legal documents to reflect the letter's instructions and assist Edgar Charles Thorn in his rightful inheritance." Elliston bowed. "I will set matters right at once." Poirot continued. "And Colonel, you shall serve as Edgar's guardian through this transition, proving that duty and loyalty need not be veiled in secrecy." Carrington stiffened, then inclined his head. "I am honored to uphold that trust." Finally, Poirot addressed the inspector. "Inspector Horbury, I believe all elements are now in place for formal closure." Horbury nodded. "We will notify the magistrate of the altered will and the household's exonerations. save for Edgar's admission of burglary and attempted arson. He shall face the court, but with Sir Reginald's endorsement, which I trust will influence his sentence." Sir Reginald smiled faintly. "Let mercy temper justice." Poirot turned back to Hastings, whispering, "The little grey cells rejoice in harmony restored." Hastings grinned. As the household gathered for the final luncheon, memoir open on the table, Sir Reginald at its head, Edgar at his side, a sense of renewal filled the air. The final piece had fallen into place, truth laid bare, secrets dispelled, and the bonds of family tested now stronger for their trials. Tomorrow's reveal would cement justice, but tonight, reconciliation reigned supreme. Chapter 15. The Final Gathering. Late morning sunlight filtered through the tall sash windows of Sir Reginald's drawing-room, illuminating the polished mahogany and warming the rich hues of red velvet draperies. Today, the entire household had been summoned for a final assembly. Lady Beatrice, newly reconciled with her cousin Edgar Charles Thorn, Colonel Carrington, standing at attention by the hearth, Mr. Elliston, portfolio in hand, Miss Pryor and Merton, side by side, near the window, and, of course, Inspector Horbury, flanked by two uniformed officers. At the center of the room stood Hercule Poirot, his cane planted firmly before him, a thin smile playing about his mustachios. Poirot surveyed the gathering with a measured calm. "Mes amis," he began, voice soft yet carrying through the room, "we have traversed a labyrinth of misdirection, forged alliances of convenience, and weathered storms of fear. Now, at last, we stand at the threshold of truth." He gestured gracefully to a low table upon which lay, in deliberate display, the genuine memoir, the sealed will addendum, and the silver-domed cigarette case. "Here are the tokens of our inquiry, the memoir that betrayed a legacy, the letter that restored it, and the case that first summoned us." A hush deepened as each person met Poirot's gaze. Lady Beatrice clasped her hands in her lap, Edgar's steady presence beside her a silent comfort. Colonel Carrington's jaw was set, loyalty etched in every line of his posture. Mr. Elliston adjusted his spectacles, as though preparing to hear a final summons. Miss Pryor's fingers twisted the lace at her cuffs, and Merton's eyes were fixed on Poirot's cane, as though it were a conductor's baton, poised to signal the overture. Poirot continued, pacing slowly before the assemblage. "I propose now to reconstruct the sequence of events, step by step, so that each of you may see how the culprit wove a tapestry of illusion." He paused by the memoir. First, the theft of the late Lady Thorn's memoir from the secret drawer, executed by hands both familiar and unseen. This act set our drama in motion. He lifted the memoir, allowing its worn cover to catch the light, before placing it back gently. "Next," he said, moving to the will addendum, the sealed instruction that would have prevented misunderstanding, Sir Reginald's explicit bequest to his cousin Edgar Charles Thorn. This document, concealed behind a panel, became the pivot upon which our suspect's motive. This document, concealed behind a panel, became the pivot upon which our suspect's motive turned. He tapped the seal, then stepped aside. Then came the staged, poisoning tableau. The silver cigarette case under glass, the smell of jasmine masking the ink smear, and the torn warning letter left to misdirect suspicion upon our solicitor. Poirot's eyes flicked to Mr. Elliston. "Mr. Elliston, your torn fragment, though unintended to harm, served this end." Elliston inclined his head, silent, until Poirot moved on. "The first false lead," Poirot continued, "led Inspector Horbury to arrest Mr. Elliston, an arrest that collapsed under scrutiny, exposing the deeper design. He offered a slight bow to the inspector, who inclined his head in return. Poirot then shifted his stance toward Colonel Carrington and Miss Pryor. Alliances formed in fear of scandal between Colonel Carrington and Mr. Elliston, between Miss Pryor and Edgar, wove threads of loyalty that threatened to bind each of you to the unfolding crime. Miss Pryor's gaze flickered to Edgar, who held her hand reassuringly. "We observed," Poirot said, "the initial escape of the manuscript, the secondary burglary of the decoy, and the desperate attempt to incinerate evidence in the greenhouse. Each act propelled us closer to the hidden identity of Edgar Charles Thorn, that is, our gardener, ECF, and rightful heir." At the mention of Edgar's initials, be his new surname spoken, Edgar straightened, face serene but marked by recent trials. Poirot paused, his little grey cells erupting with silent satisfaction. "And yet," he said, raising a finger, "we require one final moment of clarity before I unveil the ultimate revelation." He swept his gaze across the circle. "I ask each of you now to consider. What did you conceal in your heart when you first heard of Sir Reginald's collapse? What did you fear he might reveal? And how did that fear guide your hand, whether in tearing a page, framing a colleague, or staging a scene?" Lady Beatrice's lips parted as if to speak, but she stayed her breath. Colonel Carrington's uniform creased under his tightened grip. Mr. Elliston's portfolio felt heavier in his hands. Miss Pryor's fingers stilled, and Merton set his shoulders back with newfound resolve. Edgar's eyes, once shadowed by doubt, held a quiet dignity. Poirot softened his tone. "Now, for the sake of true justice and restoration of harmony, I invite each of you to speak one word, the word that encapsulates your motive in this tragedy. One word only, uttered in honest reflection." He nodded once, decisively. Beatrice was first. Gathering her courage, she stepped forward. "Love," she said, voice steady though soft. Colonel Carrington followed. "Duty." Mr. Elliston cleared his throat. "Security." Miss Pryor advanced, gaze unwavering. "Protection." Merton, voice low but firm, said, "Loyalty." Edgar, last of all, met Poirot's eyes. "Restoration." Poirot allowed their words to resonate in the hush. Then, with a graceful flourish, he raised his cane. "Thank you, mes amis. Your words have illuminated the emotional currents beneath each action, but one among you claimed a motive not confessed." He let the silence stretch. "Tomorrow we shall meet again, this time to see which single motive transcended all others, to unmask the hand that laid the first false card, and to understand how love, duty, security, protection, loyalty, and restoration coalesced into that fatal design." He tapped his cane lightly. "Until then, reflect upon the word you have spoken, and brace yourselves for the final unveiling." With that, he turned and swept from the room, leaving the assembled group suspended between yesterday's deceptions and tomorrow's disclosure. As the door closed behind him, the drawing-room remained still, each person lost in private contemplation, waiting for the moment when Poirot's little grey cells would do what no other mind could: bring the culprit into the light. Chapter 16. The Reveal. The drawing-room was hushed in midday. Stillness when Poirot returned, his step unfaltering, cane in hand. The assembled household, Lady Beatrice, Edgar Charles Thorn, Colonel Carrington, Mr. Elliston, Miss Pryor, Merton, and Inspector Horbury, turned expectantly. Each face bore the tension of unspoken questions, each posture stiff with anticipation. Poirot paused before the low table where the memoir, will addendum, and cigarette case lay as silent witnesses. "Mes amis," he began, voice soft yet resonant, "we have heard your single words of motive, love, duty, security, protection, loyalty, and restoration. He allowed a moment for those words to echo in the still air. Now comes the moment to unveil the hand that set every piece in motion, to dismantle each deception with the precision of logic. He first faced Miss Pryor. "Mademoiselle, you entered the fray out of protection for Lady Beatrice's reputation. You removed the memoir, believing its exposure would cause scandal. Your fingerprints upon the dome, your perfume masking ink's tang, all speak to your role in staging the scene. Yet you acted at another's behest." Miss Pryor swallowed. "I aided Edgar, thinking him my friend." Her voice trembled. Poirot bowed his head. "Honorable intentions, but poor execution. Next, Mr. Elliston. You tore the warning letter to spare anxiety, yet the ink on Sir Reginald's armchair matched your solicitor's pen. You confessed to wounding truth with a shred of paper." Elliston bowed his head. "I meant only to calm him." Poirot lifted his gaze to Colonel Carrington. "You counseled secrecy to protect your honor. You warned Miss Pryor in confidence, but your boots stamped prints in the greenhouse, implicating you in the desperate attempt to destroy evidence." Carrington's face colored. "I only sought to comfort, not conspire." Poirot's moustaches quivered. "Yet comfort and conspiracy share a fine line. Mr. Merton, you sheltered Miss Pryor, believing your loyalty would preserve order. But your alibi dissolved under scrutiny, and your quick hands reset the dome." Merton bowed his head. "I feared chaos." Poirot turned to Edgar Charles Thorn, who stood at the center, head inclined in caution. "And you, Edgar, born Edgar Charles Fielding, who believed yourself wronged by lineage, who adopted a false name to reclaim an ancient inheritance. You wielded secrecy like a blade." He tapped the will addendum. "You thought the memoir's removal would force Sir Reginald to produce this letter. When panic failed, you staged threats, you enlisted Miss Pryor, you scattered mud and ink, and you nearly destroyed the truth in the greenhouse's flame." Edgar's breath caught. I never wished him harm." Poirot nodded slowly. "No poison stained that tea, no fatal blow felled him. Yet your deception nearly cost us more than shock. You orchestrated the false poisoning to veil your true aim, restoration of your birthright." He lifted the restoration of your birthright. He lifted the silver-domed cigarette case. "This case, placed beneath glass, began our inquiry. Its abrasion revealed your tentative hand. The stained cup proved your ink. The jasmine veil your desperation. And finally, the engraving, ECF, etched upon the clock's weight, bore witness to your hidden name." Edgar's shoulders slumped. "I thought no one would find it." Poirot pressed on. "But small engravings speak louder than grand gestures. From that weight to the torn letters, from the dome to the greenhouse embers, each clue pointed to one who moved between loyalty and ambition, between kinship and deceit. You, Edgar Charles Thorn, are the mastermind of this drama." He stepped back, allowing the room to absorb the revelation. Beatrice's hand flew to her mouth. Miss Pryor's eyes brimmed. Carrington's gaze flickered with remorse. Elliston's lips quivered. Merton's posture slumped. Even Horbury's stern veneer softened in recognition. Poirot's tone grew gentle. "Justice demands accountability, but mercy tempers retribution. Sir Reginald, it is yours to decide how to judge your cousin, whose motives sprang from restoration, yet whose methods endangered all." He turned to the old lord, seated nearby. Sir Reginald, now fully alert, nodded. "Edgar," he said, voice firm yet forgiving, "you have wrought confusion and fear, but your aim was noble. I intend to show clemency, Tomorrow the magistrate will hear your case, and I shall speak to your character as my kin." Edgar bowed deeply. "Thank you, Father," Poirot concluded, "and to the rest of you, remember this. A single motive pursued in secrecy can unravel the strongest bonds. Let the truth we reveal today guide you away from further shadows." He faced Inspector Horbury. "Monsieur, our reveal is complete." Horbury inclined his head. "We shall proceed with due process and ensure each has account for their part, yet I suspect Sir Reginald's endorsement will weigh heavily." Poirot's moustaches twitched in amusement. "Indeed, the law and justice, in proper harmony, can restore both order and mercy." With a final nod, Poirot stepped back, allowing the household to absorb the truth and prepare for the outcome. In the quiet aftermath, a sense of release permeated the room. The culprit was unmasked, the motives laid bare, and the path to justice illuminated by the little grey cells at work. Chapter 17. Outcome and Justice. The autumn sun slanted low through the drawing-room's mullioned windows as guests and staff gathered once more, this time in a subdued yet expectant mood. Sir Reginald Thorn sat in his high-backed armchair near the fireplace, his once pallid cheeks suffused with renewed colour and determination. At his side stood Edgar Charles Thorn, formerly Fielding, his posture straight, bearing both the weight of confession and the relief of redemption. Around them formed a semicircle the remaining principals: Lady Beatrice, Colonel Carrington, Mr. Elliston, Miss Prior, Merton, and Inspector Horbury, the latter now joined by a small retinue of magistrates' officers. The time for mercy, balanced against the demands of justice, had arrived. Sir Reginald cleared his throat, folding the restored will addendum within his trembling fingers. "We assemble today to address the consequences of choices made, choices born of love, loyalty, fear, and desperation." He cast a gentle glance at Edgar. "Cousin, your misunderstanding cost us all anguish, yet you have shown contrition most sincere." He inclined his head toward Inspector Horbury. "Inspector, what legal verdict does the court require?" Inspector Horbury stepped forward, unrolling a parchment bearing the magistrate's summary. "Sir Reginald, the law acknowledges your familial authority and the mitigating circumstances of Edgar's motives. While the charges of burglary and attempted arson remain, the court recommends clemency in sentencing, provided restitution and public acknowledgement of wrongdoing." He looked to Edgar. "Your plea of guilty and your father's endorsement have weighed heavily in this recommendation." Edgar swallowed, voice firm. "I accept full responsibility for my actions. I offer myself to any sentence deemed just." His gaze lifted towards Sir Reginald. "Father, I will honor whatever you decree." Sir Reginald rose with deliberate grace, extending a hand to Edgar. "My son," he said, voice both stern and tender, "your birthright restored was never in question. My only regret is that I delayed your knowledge. I hereby petition the court to impose the lightest possible penalty, a brief public admonishment, followed by service to this estate under Colonel Carrington's guidance, so that you may learn responsibility in practice." He turned to Horbury. "Do you accept this petition?" Inspector Horbury inclined respectfully. "With the court's approval, yes." He addressed the officers. "Release Mr. Thorn under recognizance to his father and Colonel Carrington." As the officers removed Edgar's light restraints, he bowed deeply. "Thank you, sir. I will not fail your trust again." He clasped Sir Reginald's hand, eyes moist with gratitude. Sir Reginald then addressed the assembly. "Now, to those whose actions intertwined with my cousin's plight, Miss Prior, Merton, Colonel Carrington, and Mr. Elliston, I offer a further pardon, on condition that each assists Edgar in restoring our household's harmony and transparency. He looked first to Miss Pryor. Eleanor, you acted from protection, yet permitted fear to cloud judgment. I ask that you serve as my secretary, overseeing all correspondence to ensure no further secrets hide. Miss Pryor inclined her head, tears welling. I am honored and humbled, sir. She crossed to Edgar, placing a gentle hand on his arm as a sign of renewed alliance. Sir Reginald turned to Merton. Merton, you defended loyalty above candor. Together with Colonel Carrington, you shall reform the household's policies, ensuring that every servant understands the value of truth as much as duty. Merton bowed deeply. It shall be as you command, sir. He then faced Colonel Carrington. You will mentor Edgar, instructing him in matters of estate management and honorable conduct. Your own honor I test again. Guide him wisely. Carrington straightened, squared his shoulders, and saluted. I accept with gratitude, sir. Finally, Sir Reginald addressed Mr. Elliston. Justice requires that legal instruments be both fair and transparent. You, Mr. Elliston, will oversee the publication of these memoirs and the announcement of Edgar's inheritance in the public gazette, so that no shadow of doubt lingers. The solicitor inclined, portfolio in hand. I will prepare the notices at once, Sir Reginald. A ripple of relief passed through the room as each person acknowledged their new responsibilities. Inspector Horbury closed his ledger. With these conditions met, the court shall consider this matter resolved. He signalled to his officers, who gathered their papers and prepared to depart. As the officers left, Sir Reginald gestured for quiet. Let us not forget the lessons we have learned. That secrecy, even with noble intent, can lead to unintended harm. That open hearts and honest words are the true bonds of family. He turned to Edgar. My son, let this day mark not only your legal exoneration, but your moral rebirth. Edgar knelt, kissing his father's hand. I am yours to guide, always. He rose, standing tall beside his newfound family. Lady Beatrice stepped forward, placing a hand on Edgar's shoulder. Brother, together we shall rebuild what was nearly lost. She smiled through tears, and Edgar returned her embrace. Poirot, who had watched from a seat near the window, rose and approached the group. His moustaches quivered in satisfaction. Sir Reginald, I applaud your wisdom. Justice served with mercy fortifies the very foundations of society. He turned to the assembled household. And you, mes amis, have shown that even the gravest mistakes may be redeemed by truth and repentance. He bowed gracefully. I take my leave, confident that your bonds, once tested, will endure with greater strength. At Poirot's departure, Hastings followed with a fond nod. A job well done, as always, mon ami. Poirot placed a gloved hand over his heart. Merci, Hastings. But it is the courage of this family that writes the final line of our mystery. He smiled, then stepped through the drawing-room's twin doors, leaving Thorn House to embrace its new chapter. As the afternoon waned, Sir Reginald, Edgar, and their loyal household gathered for a quiet repast. No memoirs hidden, no letters sealed in silence, but conversation open and unguarded. Justice had been meted with a compassionate hand, and the Thorn legacy, though scarred, now stood poised to flourish anew under the light of honesty and forgiveness. Chapter 18. The closing remark. The afternoon light had softened into a honeyed glow by the time Poirot and Hastings prepared to depart Thorn House. The drawing-room, once the stage for misdirection and fear, now felt suffused with calm. its heavy draperies drawn back to reveal the trimmed hedgerows and blooming roses of the Mayfair garden beyond. Lady Beatrice and Edgar Charles Thorn stood by the open French doors, sharing quiet laughter as they reviewed their father's instructions for the estate's management. Colonel Carrington consulted with Mr. Elliston over financial ledgers at the low table. Miss Pryor and Merton exchanged warm smiles as they arranged Sir Reginald's afternoon tea service. Even Inspector Horbury, seated by the fireplace, allowed himself a brief smile of satisfaction. Poirot, cane in hand, surveyed the scene with his small, knowing smile. "Mon ami," he said to Hastings under his breath, "observe how order returns when truth is allowed to breathe." Hastings inclined his head. It seems even the hardest hearts relax in the sunshine of honesty. Just then, Sir Reginald, slightly stooped but invigorated in spirit, entered the room, leaning on his silver-headed cane. His eyes glowed with pride as they rested on his reunited family and loyal staff. He approached Poirot with evident gratitude. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, voice warm, "it is thanks to your tireless little grey cells that we have rediscovered each other. I bade my household to honesty, yet it was your wisdom that guided them back from the shadows." Poirot bowed deeply. "Sir Reginald, the honor is mine. The human heart is a labyrinth of motives. It is both a privilege and a pleasure to illuminate its corridors." He tapped his temple lightly, and in doing so we uncover not only guilt, but also capacity for forgiveness. Sir Reginald nodded. "Your detective work is surpassed only by your understanding of human nature. I shall endeavor to honor your lessons in my governance of this estate." Lady Beatrice stepped forward, curtsying with grace. "Monsieur Poirot, on behalf of our family, I extend heartfelt thanks. You have restored my father's trust, my brother's place, and our household's harmony." Poirot's moustaches quivered in delight. "Madame, you may now pursue your happiness untroubled by secrets. May love and light ever guide your path." Edgar Charles Thorn approached, doffing a respectful bow. "Detective, I owe you my future. I shall serve this family and you in gratitude for the truth you unveiled." Poirot placed a kindly hand on Edgar's shoulder. "Serve well, Edgar, and allow your experience to temper your compassion. For the little grey cells teach us that mercy is as necessary as justice." Hastings, standing to the side, watched the exchange with a smile. Poirot caught his eye and gave a subtle nod, signaling that their work here was done. Inspector Horbury rose and extended his hand to Poirot. "Monsieur Poirot, it has been an honor to cooperate with you. I have learned much from your methods." Poirot clasped the inspector's hand. "Mon ami, the law and the mind are allies in the pursuit of truth. Continue to wield justice with the kindness you have shown today." With final farewells exchanged, Poirot and Hastings stepped onto the polished hall floor. Merton offered them wraps against the evening chill, and Miss Pryor presented a sprig of lavender from the conservatory, a fragrance of peace and new beginnings. As they descended the grand staircase, Poirot paused at the bottom, turning once more to regard the assembled household framed in the upper hall's arch. He raised a small finger in farewell. "I leave you now," he said, voice carrying even in the spacious foyer, "not with the burden of secrets, but with the lightness of truth. May your days be free of fear, and your hearts open to one another. And let this house forever remember, a single secret, like a single lie, can topple the strongest bonds, but the smallest act of candor can rebuild them stronger still." With that, he turned to Hastings, and the two detectives walked through the open front door into the crisp autumn air. As they stepped onto the cobbled drive, Hastings glanced back. "Another case brilliantly concluded, Poirot," he said. "Do you foresee any more mysteries tonight?" Poirot chuckled softly, adjusting his bowler hat. "Perhaps, mon ami. In every shadow there remains a question. But for tonight, let us rest our little grey cells, and prepare to light them anew upon our next adventure." Together they departed into the Mayfair streets, their silhouettes receding under gas lamps now aglow. Behind them, Thorn House stood silent in its restored serenity, the echoes of its trials fading like distant thunder. Yet, within its walls, the memory of detection and reconciliation would endure, a testament to the enduring power of truth, compassion, and the unmistakable brilliance of Hercule Poirot's little grey cells.